Hello, everyone. Jim Biringer here, NHLRumors.com. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below. Talking about the Nashville Predators today, and here we go again. The same old story with Barry Trotz and the Nashville Predators. He was on 102.5 The Game, ESPN in Nashville, and he talked about, the coaching and if he was going to make a coaching change, because let's be honest, Andrew Burnett's name's been out there. Again, the team is struggling. They're not off to the start everybody expected them to be. They're near the bottom of the Western Conference standings, and a lot of people are circling. The vultures are circling. They're looking to pluck pieces out of this team. The problem is Barry Trotz wants player for player, and he's not going to be able to get that. But he's not going to get futures. He doesn't want, picks. He doesn't want prospects. He wants players so he can turn this thing around, as which he's calling building, transitioning, in building mode, as he likes to call it. Whether it's rebuilding, retooling, whatever you want to use, that's what the Nashville Predators are doing. The problem is they should have done it in the summer of 24 and maybe in the summer of 23, because, again, they had that 18-game winning streak, point streak, and after the U2 concert, after it was canceled, and they get in the playoffs, but they lose. It was Colorado again. They always lose Colorado. They always lose to Chicago, somebody. But instead of going to the future and making that transition on the fly, similar to what we see in Washington, and he kept citing the Washington Capitals, and, you look at it and you say, the light goes off in your head and you say to yourself, okay, well, if he's citing the Washington Capitals, that means the Buffalo Sabre plan is out the window. And teams are avoiding the Buffalo Sabre plan. That's why the Calgary Flames don't want to go into a rebuild. Don Maloney was talking about it, putting in young players that, aren't ready. You just don't want to put young players in there because the culture, it hurts them. It hurts their development. It hurts the culture of what you're building there. And he's right. Look, Buffalo, a lot of years of losing. Guys get tired. Guys want to leave. If you feel those players are your future, why put them in a situation where they're always going to be losing and not succeeding? So I get that. That's the Calgary standpoint. That's the Nashville standpoint. But they had those guys. Philip Tomasino was there. Tommy Novak was there. Dante Fabro was there. Eli Tolvanen was there. Yaroslav Askarov was there. The list goes on of young players that they had in Nashville that they chose to move on from because they weren't Barry Trotz guys. They were David Poile picks, and he wanted to move on from David Poile picks. And if you keep listening to that interview, he talks about, well, you never had any homegrown talent. Yeah, you let it out the door in these trades. Alexander Carrier for Justin Barron. I mean, the list goes on of moves, and yet David Poile's the one that got Philip Forsberg for Martin Erat. So, and they brought in PK Subban for Shea Weber. They've made those types of trades, but they've bet on the wrong players. And in the summer of 24, they get to the playoffs, everybody's happy, and then they sign Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea, and they keep Wedgwood. And guys you thought were going to be elevated in the lineup weren't. But they have too many of the same player. And the coach, Andrew Burnett, who was loved in New Jersey as an assistant, loved in Florida, cannot make adjustments on the fly. That was his one fatal flaw. That's why Bill Z don't want to move on from him. He changed the identity and brought in Paul Maurice. Barry Trotz was a head coach, and he's still a head coach at heart. And he knows he can't fire him because he's been in that situation. But again, Trotz left Nashville after a long time, went to Washington, won, went to the island, and won. Again, at some point, you have to make the decision that maybe Andrew Burnett's not the guy. We saw Chicago do it. Yeah, Luke Richardson wasn't put in the situation to succeed. Maybe if he had this team in Chicago, he would have been fine. But Kyle Davidson didn't put his coach in a situation to succeed. And maybe, again, certain coaches with the mix, it just wouldn't have worked out. We know the Nashville Predators have not put Andrew Burnett in a situation to succeed, but also coaching staff has not given the players an opportunity to succeed, and they're playing hard for them. So that's why they're not going to make the coaching change. And I don't think I expect one this season. Do I expect trades? Again, none of the players who have no movement clauses have went to Barry Trotz and said they wanted out. Ryan O'Reilly does not have a no trade clause or no movement clause, but he's treated as a player that does have one. But teams are going to want a center. And Barry Trotz talks about not having a center and not having playmakers. They don't have a playmaker for Steven Stamkos or Jonathan Marchessault. They should have signed one of those guys and not the other guy. They've changed their defense. Yeah, you have UC Saros, but you don't have a backup goalie. There's a lot of issues in Nashville, and they just chose the wrong direction. And at some point, the mission statement has to change. But is Barry Trotz going to realize it? Because loyalty to a point lets you lose your job later on, a.k.a. Ray Shero, the late great Ray Shero, and Dan Bilesma in Pittsburgh. So loyalty to a fault is stupidity. And right now, according to some people I've talked to, Haslam, the new owner of the Nashville Predators, is like the old ownership with David Poile. They're just going to let him run things. And Philip Forsberg and Roman Josi are the only untouchables. I know Forsberg's name's been out there, but if Forsberg got traded, I think there would be an uproar, and I think the general manager would lose his job. They have to figure out a way to piece this thing together. It's great you have Matthew Wood playing in the lineup. It's great Brady Martin's in the system. LaRue's there. Like, all these guys, they have young players coming along, but are they going to put them in situations to succeed? Luke Evangelista could be one of those guys, but is he going to want to stay? Only time will tell. Nashville, what are we doing? What's your direction? Similar to Calgary, what's your direction? Talked about it on Rod Peterson's show this week. Little disconnect between ownership. But then you hear what Don Maloney's talking about. Oh, we don't want to play all these young players, establish a culture of losing. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. We know Nazem Kadri's not going anywhere. Blake Coleman, he's a name that's out there. Rasmus Anderson's another name that's out there. Anderson's the UFA. Again, similar to the situation in Nashville, they don't really have a lot of UFAs to give. Teams are going to be looking at the trade deadline. Rasmus Anderson's one of those names. Probably should have been resolved before the season started. Wasn't. Now it's the elongated game. When is Anderson going to get traded? And then Nazem Kadri. And then Blake Coleman. But I don't believe Nazem Kadri is going anywhere out of Calgary, so that's a pipe dream. So that takes another center off the board for right now. Unless you make him an offer you can't refuse, then we'll see. Similar in St. Louis, what's your direction? Because you're near the bottom of the Western Conference. We hear Braden Shen's name out there, Jordan Kyrou, Justin Falk, Pavel Buchnevich. But in all three cases, it's a patient waiting game because there's not enough supply and there's too much demand. So if you have a center, you can hold out. You can be patient. Make me an offer I can't refuse, as they said in The Godfather. Again, Doug Armstrong, we talked about in a similar video, how many times you're going to threaten guys to be traded and don't pull the trigger, though I do believe Jordan Kyrou's not going anywhere. Just interesting situations. Again, St. Louis is kind of trying to finish that Washington pattern, moving in and out guys of young talent and old talent, veterans, things like that. But everybody is scared to be like Detroit and Buffalo instead of Montreal, San Jose, and Anaheim. Because when you do it right, you're bad for a couple of years, you hit your prospects, you develop your players, you have a right mission, and you put the right pieces in place, then you take off. Nashville, if they're smart, they should tear it down. They won't. Would I be shocked to see Marchessault traded? No. Would I be shocked if Stamkos got traded? No. Because I think everybody talks about Anaheim, maybe Detroit, all these teams. What if Stamkos goes back to Tampa at Tampa's rate? And the Tampa rate was what they wanted him on before he left for Nashville. Something to watch. Maybe the Devils go and try to get Marchessault again. But again, the prices are so high, our team's willing to give up top-tier prospects for these players. Something to watch moving forward. Nashville, what are we doing? Calgary, what are we doing? St. Louis, what are we doing? Let's see what they can do. Can they turn it around? We'll find out. Jim Biringer, NHLRumors.com. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Guys, take care. We'll be back again real soon.